The purple sky of Oros didn't offer comfort. It offered only the heavy, suffocating weight of a world that had forgotten its own history. Ilara's fingers, raw and bleeding beneath her tactical gloves, dug into the porous rock of the great spire. Every breath was a struggle against the thin, sulfur-tainted air, but she didn't stop. Beside her, Kale moved with the practiced grace of a species born to these heights, his 4 amber eyes scanning the darkness below. He was a holy guardian of the Iron Ancestor, a man who had spent his life praying to a god made of rust, and right now, his god was about to wake up in the worst way possible. Below them, the torches of the Shadow Breakers flickered like a sea of angry orange stars. They were a cult of nihilists who believed that the Iron Ancestor was a weapon of the first end, and they intended to use the sacred heart of the giant to scour the world clean. Ilara knew the truth, or at least a version of it that was far more terrifying than any demon or deity. She knew that the sacred heart was a leaking, unstable fusion core, and if the zealots managed to bypass the manual containment, Oros wouldn't be cleansed, it would be turned into a radioactive crater visible from orbit. The ancestor groans, Skywalker, Kale whispered, his voice a low vibration that resonated in his chest. Can you not hear the spirit's agony? The metal weeps. Ilara paused, pressing her ear against the cold, oxidized surface of what she knew was a hydraulic stabilizer the size of a redwood tree. She didn't hear a spirit. She heard the deep, rhythmic thrum of a failing cooling system, the groan of stressed titanium, and the hiss of escaping steam. To Kale, this was the language of the divine. To Ilara, it was the sound of a 22nd century heavy-duty exodrill screaming for maintenance it would never receive. They reached a massive, circular platform, the altar of the left foot, where the metal giant met the stone of the mountain. The scale was dizzying. The ancestor sat slumped against the spire, one hand buried in the rock as if it had been trying to hold the world together during its final moments. It was covered in the scars of 1,000 years, bird nests in the joint seals, moss growing over the sensor arrays, and the deep orange rot of iron oxide eating away at the hull. The Shadow Breakers were gaining ground. A musket ball whistled past Ilara's head, sparking off the ancestor's metal skin with a sharp ping. She pulled her pulse pistol, firing a burst of blue energy into the darkness. The zealots screamed, falling back momentarily, but they were thousands, driven by the madness of a dying world. The hatch is above the knee joint. Ilara shouted over the rising wind. We have to get inside before they reach the primary access port. They scrambled up a series of decorative iron ladders that the Erosian monks had welded onto the giant over centuries of pilgrimage. These monks had spent their lives polishing the god's shins and painting murals on its armor plating, never realizing they were merely cleaning the exterior of a piece of industrial mining equipment. As they reached the primary maintenance hatch, Ilara saw the sacred runes etched into the metal. To Kale, they were the words of creation. To Ilara, they were a standard safety warning: danger, pressurized hydraulics. Authorized personnel only. She didn't need a prayer to open the door. She reached into a recessed alcove, felt for the emergency manual release, a lever hidden behind a rusted plate, and pulled with everything she had. With a screech of metal on metal that sounded like a dying beast, the hatch hissed open, venting a cloud of ancient, stale air that smelled of ozone, burnt oil, and something inexplicably human. Kale fell to his knees, his forehead touching the cold floor of the airlock. The gateway to the soul, he chanted, his voices, for he had 2 sets of vocal cords, harmonizing in a haunting melody. Grant us passage, O First One. Ilara stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the pitch-black interior. The gateway to the soul was a narrow corridor lined with bundles of frayed fiber-optic cables and rusted conduits. Red emergency lights flickered feebly, struggling to life as her presence triggered the proximity sensors. The walls were covered in more divine inscriptions, maintenance schedules, wiring diagrams, and a faded yellow sticker that said days without an accident. 04. Get up, Kale. Ilara hissed, pulling the alien to his feet. This isn't a temple, it's a machine. And if we don't reach the cockpit, the Shadow Breakers are going to turn the key on a bomb they don't understand. They sprinted through the guts of the giant, climbing through vertical shafts that served as the ancestor's spine. The sounds of the battle outside grew muffled, replaced by the internal heartbeat of the mech. The floor vibrated beneath them as the Shadow Breakers began hammering at the external cooling vents below. The reactor was spiking. The air grew hot, the smell of scorching insulation filling the narrow tunnels. They reached this sanctum of the mind, the cockpit. The door was a heavy, reinforced slab of steel. Kale stopped, his amber eyes wide with terror. The legends say that only the sinless may enter the mind of the Father. Those who are unworthy are turned to ash by his gaze. Elara looked at the door. Beside it was a small glass panel. She didn't have time for a theology debate. She stepped up to the panel, which glowed with a faint, red light. Retinal scan required. The laser swept over her eye. The system hesitated, a million years of data rot and corrupted files clashing with the sudden, impossible presence of a living human. Then a chime echoed through the silent cockpit. Access granted. Welcome back, Operator Reed. The door slid open with a smooth, silent grace that the rest of the rusted hulk lacked. Inside, the cockpit was a masterpiece of 22nd century ergonomics. 2 seats sat side by side, surrounded by a wraparound array of darkened screens and tactile controls. Kale stepped inside, his breath hitching in his throat. He saw the altar, the pilot's chair, and the relics surrounding it. Look, Kale whispered, pointing to the center console. The icons of the gods. On the dashboard sat a small plastic figurine of a yellow cartoon dog with a bobbing head, a bobblehead, its paint faded and cracked. Beside it was a stained ceramic mug with the words "World's Okayest Driller" printed on the side. To Kale, these were objects of immense spiritual power, symbols of a reality beyond comprehension. To Elara they were a punch in the gut. These weren't gods. They were people. They were workers. They were us. She sat in the pilot's chair, the haptic sensors in the seat adjusting to her form with a ghostly sigh. The screens flickered to life, showing a distorted, grainy view of the mountainside outside. The shadow breakers had reached the external vents. They were pouring oil and lit torches into the intake, trying to ignite the fire of the soul. Reactor temperature at 1,200 degrees and climbing, a synthesized feminine voice announced. It wasn't the voice of a goddess. It was a standard AIOS, calm and professional. Core breach imminent. Please initiate emergency vent or evacuate the vehicle. Elara's fingers flew across the tactile controls, her muscle memory kicking in from years of training in the Relic Hunter academies. She had to shut down the core, but the manual override was jammed by the rust. She had to wake the ancestor just enough to clear the vents. Kale, hold on to something, she yelled. She grabbed the twin joysticks, the hands of justice in erosion myth, and pushed forward. The world shook. Outside, the iron ancestor didn't just roar, it moved. The ancient joints, seized by centuries of salt and grit, groaned as the internal motors surged with the last of the reactor's dying strength. The giant's head, which had been slumped against the spire, lifted. Its glowing blue eyes, the lights of judgment, flickered to life, casting a terrifying radiance over the zealots below. With a sound like a mountain collapsing, the ancestor's right arm tore free from the rock. The movement sent the shadow breakers screaming in terror, their musket fire useless against the ancient hull. The giant didn't attack, it simply stood up, its massive weight shifting as it cleared the debris from its cooling vents. A massive blast of superheated steam erupted from its back, incinerating the torches and the oil the zealots had gathered. The ancestor has risen. Kale cried out, his 4 hands clasped in prayer. He judges the unrighteous. See how they fly before his glory. Elara didn't look at the fleeing army. She was staring at a small, transparent plastic sleeve tucked into the sun visor of the cockpit. She reached up and pulled it down. Inside was a physical photograph, preserved by the vacuum seal of the cockpit. It showed a man in a blue jumpsuit, the same man she saw in the retinal scan records, standing in front of a small greenhouse with a white picket fence. He was holding a small child on his shoulders, and a woman was standing beside him, laughing. They were on a planet with a blue sky and a single, bright sun. On the back of the photo, written in a shaky, hurried hand, were the words, "To Dad. Come home safe from Oros. We love you. Sarah and Ben." The Iron Ancestor wasn't a god who had come to seed life or judge the stars. He was a father. He was a miner named Reed who had been sent to a remote purple rock to dig for isotopes to pay for a house with a white picket fence. He had probably died here when the first cycle ended, trapped in his machine as the atmosphere turned toxic or the stars went cold. He had sat in this chair looking at this photo, while the world he knew disappeared, leaving only the primitives to grow up in the shadow of his tools. The divine armor was his PP. The Sacred Heart was his engine. The Gospel was his maintenance manual. Reactor stabilized, the AI announced. Shutting down for indefinite standby. Battery at 0.02%. Goodbye, Operator Reed. The screens faded to black. The glowing eyes of the giant dimmed, and the Iron Ancestor settled back into its mountain tomb, once again a silent statue of rust and memory. The shadow breakers had vanished into the night, broken by the glance of their god. Kale stood in the center of the cockpit, his amber eyes wet with tears. We have seen the face of the first one, Alara. We have stood in the mind of the Creator. Oros is saved. The ancestor has spoken. Alara looked at the photo of the man and his family. She looked at the bobblehead dog and the world's okayest driller mug. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, a realization that humanity was a ghost haunting its own graveyard. We weren't the children of gods. We were just the children of people who worked too hard and died too far from home. She tucked the photo into her jacket, close to her own heart. He didn't speak, Kale, she said quietly, her voice echoing in the dead cockpit. He was just tired. He just wanted to go home. She stood up, the silence of the machine feeling heavier than the purple sky outside. They would go back down the mountain, and Kale would tell the stories of how the Iron Ancestor rose to defeat the darkness. He would add a new chapter to the Holy Gospel, describing the divine vision inside the sanctum. And Alara would keep the photo. She would keep the secret that the ancient gods weren't beings of light and magic, but beings of sweat and steel. We were the precursors. We were the legends. And the most divine thing about us was that even at the end of the world, we still took photos of our kids and kept our favorite mugs on the dashboard. As she stepped back out into the purple night, leaving the rusted giant to sleep for another 1,000,000 years, she looked up at the twin moons. Somewhere out there, in another cycle, another human was probably sitting in a cockpit looking at a photo and wondering if they would ever make it home. Humanity had proven the ultimate relic hunter truth. The universe is vast and the gods are many. But if you dig deep enough, if you peel back the rust and the myth, you won't find a throne. You'll find a workbench. You won't find a crown. You'll find a hard hat. We are the architects of our own mythology, and our greatest legacy isn't the stars we conquered. It's the simple, mundane humanity we left behind in the dark. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. The ancestor is sleeping. The work continues. That if you enjoyed this revelation of the human gods, hit that like button. Comment below. What mundane item from your life would become a holy relic in 1,000,000 years? Subscribe for the next story in the Relic Hunters saga. The satellite key. The core is cool. The memory remains.